Rosa's car was in my driveway at 7:30, a full 40 minutes before anyone needed to be anywhere, and the look on her face when I opened the front door told me something was very wrong. I should have been upstairs finishing my earrings. I should have been crying happy tears into my good mirror. Instead, I'd spent the better part of the morning sitting on the edge of the bed in my navy dress, one hand pressed flat against my sternum, feeling a weight I couldn't name. Something I couldn't point to or explain, just a heaviness, settled in beneath my ribs that had been there for weeks. I told myself it was grief, still doing what grief does, showing up without warning in the middle of otherwise good moments. Stanley had been gone 2 years, and I had learned by now that certain kinds of happiness still carried an edge to them, a sharpness from wishing he were here to share them. Or, I told myself it was just a mother's nerves. That was reasonable, wasn't it? To feel the magnitude of a day like this in your body before you could feel it any other way. What I didn't let myself think was the third thing, the thing I'd been not thinking for 8 months. Then Rosa pulled into the driveway, 40 minutes early, and I stopped pretending. Rosa Figueredo had worked for our family since Alden was in grade school. 18 years. She'd driven my husband to chemotherapy appointments and brought soup when I was too exhausted to cook, and quietly, without being asked, taken over the running of the house in that first terrible year after we lost Stanley. She had never, in 18 years, been early. She planned her days with the precision of someone who respected other people's time and expected the same in return. This wasn't her being early. This was her not being able to wait any longer. I went downstairs before she knocked. "Get in the back of my car," she said, the moment I opened the door. No greeting, no preamble. Just those 8 words, her voice low and level and leaving no room for argument. "Good morning to you too," I said. "I mean it." She stepped closer, and I saw the look in her eyes then. Careful, controlled, and underneath it, something that sat very close to grief. "Come around the side of the house. Not through the front. My car's unlocked. Get in the back seat and cover yourself with the blankets I left there. Don't let Alden see you." I heard the shower shut off upstairs. Alden would be coming down in 10 minutes. "Rosa, tell me what's happening." She was quiet for a half-second too long. Then, "I made a promise to Mr. Stanley. The last time I drove him to his appointment at KGH, he held my hand in the parking lot before he went in and he said, 'Rosa, if anything ever happens to me, look after them.' He meant you and Alden." She pressed her lips together. "I'm doing that right now. Please trust me." Stanley's name in her mouth hit somewhere behind my breastbone. I looked back up the stairs. I could hear Alden talking to his best man on the phone, laughing about something. He sounded light. He'd sounded that way since Lacey had come along, and for 8 months I had worked very deliberately to be glad about that, to choose his happiness over the quiet, persistent wrongness I could never quite articulate. 5 minutes, I said. "Now," Rosa said, "we're running out of time." I took my coat off the hook and went around the side of the house, through the garden. The back seat of Rosa's Forester smelled like cedar air freshener and the worn wool blankets she kept for her grandchildren. I folded myself in, as best I could in the dress, and she covered me without ceremony, tucking the edges down the way you'd cover something you meant to protect. "Don't make a sound," she said, through the window. Then her footsteps on the gravel, retreating toward the house. I lay in the dark and listened to my own breathing. 3 minutes, maybe 4, then the front door opened, Alden's voice, easy and warm. "Morning, Rosa. You're early." "You know me," she said, perfectly steady. "I like to make sure everything's in order." The passenger door opened. The seat shifted. His aftershave drifted back. The cedar one he'd worn since he was in his 20s, the one I'd started buying for him after Stanley stopped being able to get out to the shops. I'd never told Alden that. I probably never would. "She's the one," my son said. Not to Rosa, really, just out loud. The way you speak something you're still learning to trust. I keep waiting to feel terrified and I just feel ready. Is that strange? Your father felt the same way, Rosa said. He told me once. Said the morning of his wedding he woke up and thought, today is the first day of everything good. A long silence, the kind that carries weight. He never told me that, Alden said, and his voice was younger than 36. His phone buzzed. He answered without checking the screen first. Morning, he smiled. I could hear it. How are you feeling? Lacey's voice came through the speaker, warm and smooth, exactly as it always was. Like today can't come soon enough. Are you almost ready? Almost. Rosa's driving me, he laughed. Where are you? You said something about your aunt. Just leaving now, she's fine. A brief pause. Where's your mum? Still at the house. She wanted a bit of time to herself. You know how she gets on big days. Good. Another pause, just a breath, small and quick. Good. That's perfect. I lay perfectly still under the blankets. Good. That's perfect. I'd been collecting moments like that one for months. Small, wrong notes, a tone that didn't quite match the words, a reaction a half-second off from where it should have been. Individually, nothing. Added together, they made a sound I'd been refusing to hear. They finished their call, and then Alden's phone lit up with an unknown number. He let it ring, it stopped, rang again. That's odd. He declined it a second time. It rang immediately a third time. He answered. I told you not to call this number. His voice changed entirely. The ease dropped away, replaced by something controlled and tight. I said I'm handling it. Do not call me again. He hung up. The car was very quiet. Everything all right? Rosa asked. Wrong number, Alden said, flat, even, nothing like him. I kept my hand pressed over my mouth and thought about that phrase he'd said. I'm handling it. Thought about the 8 months of small wrongness I'd been filing away and ignoring. Rosa turned off the highway 20 minutes later. I felt the road change, smother pavement giving way to rougher neighborhood streets. We weren't heading toward the church. I knew that route. I'd driven it for 3 decades. Alden noticed, too. Rosa, this isn't the way. Quick stop. Someone left something at a café for you 2 minutes. He accepted it. I heard him glance at his phone once, exhale, say nothing. Rosa parked. She waited for Alden to move to go in, then quickly opened my door. Come, she whispered. Leave the coat, just come. She led me down a narrow side passage between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore, and stopped at the corner where we could see straight into the front window of a small café without being seen ourselves. I looked. Lacey was sitting at a table by the window. Not the Lacey I knew. Not the polished, composed woman who came to our dinners and always brought flowers and filled Stanley's silences with exactly the right words. This woman had her hair pulled back in a braid. She was in jeans and a canvas jacket. She looked like someone running an errand on a Thursday, not someone who had a ceremony in 2 hours. Across from her sat a man, broad-shouldered, unshaven, the particular kind of tired that doesn't come from one bad night's sleep. Maybe 35. At his feet, in a chair she'd clearly dragged over herself, a little girl with copper-red hair sat coloring. She had a drawing pad balanced on her knees, and she was completely absorbed in it, her tongue pressed to her lip in concentration. His name is Wade Brandt, Rosa said softly. Lacey's legal name is Lacey Brandt. She's been using her grandmother's maiden name, Kendrick, for 2 years. They've been common-law partners for 6 years. The little girl is their daughter, Pippa. She's 5. She paused. My niece Cora works in municipal records. I asked her to look 3 weeks ago. I told myself if I found nothing, I'd never say a word. Inside the cafe, Wade leaned forward. I couldn't hear him clearly, but then his voice rose slightly on the last word, the way voices do when someone is losing an argument they've had many times. Really going through with this. We've been through this, Lacey said, flat and controlled. Nothing like the voice she used with us. He seems like a decent person, Lacey. That's not what this is about. Then tell me what it is about. Wade rubbed his hands across his face. Explain it to me one more time so I actually believe it. Lacey's voice dropped. But the window was old, and the seal wasn't tight, and the street was quiet, and I heard every word. 6 months. I get access to the business accounts. I move what we need to cover decks, and then I am gone. Clark's Hardware has 4 locations across eastern Ontario. The commercial property alone, the Kingston property, is worth over $2 million. The RRSP accounts become jointly accessible after marriage. Dex gets paid. He leaves us alone. Pippa is safe. A pause. That's what this is about. Wade stared at the table. And the man's family? He said quietly. The man's family will recover. She said it without hesitation. Dex won't wait another year, Wade. You know what he said. The little girl looked up from her drawing pad, glanced around, went back to coloring. He said he'd take her, Lacey said, precise and quiet. He said he'd take Pippa where we'd never find her. You remember. The silence that followed was complete. I stepped back from the window. My legs required a moment of deliberate attention. I thought about Alden that morning, saying he just felt ready. I thought about the careful, stubborn way he'd learned to live again after his father died. I thought about every single dinner where Lacey had said exactly the right thing, and I'd pushed down the feeling in my stomach and told myself I was just a widow who hadn't learned yet how to let someone else love her son. I had not been paranoid. There's more, Rosa said. She produced a folded envelope from her jacket pocket. Wade left me a voicemail at 4 this morning. He'd found my number on Lacey's phone. He'd been trying to decide for weeks whether to do anything. When Lacey left the house this morning and told him she was going to the church, he called me. Then he drove here to meet her. He said if she saw him, she'd stop. He scanned these last night. Inside, a common law declaration signed 6 years ago, a joint bank statement, a photograph. The 3 of them at Wasaga Beach, Pippa maybe 2 years old, everyone squinting into August sun. And printed text messages. Lacey to an unsaved number 4 months ago. Clark Hardware Group has 4 locations plus a Kingston commercial property. RRSP accounts become jointly accessible post-marriage. I've confirmed the life insurance policy Stanley took out. For Alden is worth 1.4 M. And then, Alden is still grieving. He doesn't ask questions. He trusts people. This is going to be straightforward. My hands were shaking. I folded the papers back into the envelope and put it in my dress pocket. He trusts people. My son, who'd held my hand at his father's grave and said, "We'll be okay, Mum." My son, who'd come home for every birthday since the diagnosis because he didn't want me alone in the house. My son, who'd learned to make bread during the worst of the grief because he said keeping his hands busy kept his mind from going to bad places. Rosa drove us to the church. The 2 of us didn't speak much. At one point she said, "I should have looked sooner." "You looked," I said, "when it mattered." The United Church on Berry Street was full by the time we arrived. White tulips and eucalyptus in every window, afternoon light moving through the stained glass in long gold shapes. Stanley Antaga had gone to Christmas services here for 20 years. I spotted his godmother in the 3rd row. I spotted the couple who'd lived next door when Alden was in primary school. The organ was playing something soft and anticipatory. Everyone was waiting for the start of something. I found Alden in the small side room they'd given him to wait in. He was standing at the window, tie slightly crooked, turning his cufflinks over in his hands. His best man had stepped out. "Hey," he turned and his face opened into relief. "Mum, I wasn't sure if you were." "I need 5 minutes with you," I said. "Just the 2 of us, before anything else." He looked at me for a long moment. Something in my face must have told him enough, because he didn't question it. "Close the door," he said. I laid the pages on the chair between us and I spoke clearly and evenly, the way Stanley always said I could deliver hard news. not hard-heartedly, but without flinching. I told him about Rosa's call that morning, about the car, about the cafe window and the conversation I'd heard and the documents Wade had sent. I watched my son's face while he read. He didn't interrupt. He read every page twice. He set them down and was still for a very long time. "The phone call this morning," he finally said. His voice was quiet and carefully arranged. "The unknown number. That was connected to this." "Almost certainly. Lacey told me last month she had some old debt. Before we met, she said she'd sorted it." He paused. "She said it was nothing I needed to worry about." "She was sorting it," I said, "with this family's money." He stood up and walked to the window. I let him stand there. Outside, I could hear cars in the lot, voices, the ordinary sounds of people arriving for something they expected to be good. "I knew something was off," he said after a while. "Not this, nothing like this, but something." He turned around, and his eyes were wet. I kept telling myself it was just fear, that this is what commitment feels like up close, and it's meant to feel slightly too big. "I know." I didn't want to look too closely. I was scared of what I'd find. He laughed, short and painful. "Or scared of finding nothing and realizing the problem was just me." "That's not a character flaw," I said. "That's grief. Grief makes you want things to be okay so much that you help them look okay." He was quiet. "Your father would have seen through her sooner," he said. "Maybe, maybe not." Stanley was a perceptive man, but he was also vulnerable to people who knew how to be kind to someone who was already kindly disposed toward them. I paused. "She was very good, Alden. She studied us. That's different from fooling someone." He looked at the envelope in my hand. "What do I do?" he asked, not helplessly, just honestly, the way he used to ask when he was a boy, and the problem was bigger than he'd encountered before. "That's up to you," I said. "You walk back in there and you decide." My son straightened his jacket, took a breath, opened the door. He went to Reverend Marchetti first. I watched him speak quietly, watched the Reverend's face shift from ceremony readiness to something more careful. Then Alden walked into the center aisle and stood there and waited. The doors at the back of the church opened. Lacey appeared. She was genuinely beautiful. The dress was ivory and fitted, then flowing, hair up, white tulips in her hands. She looked, standing at the back of that church, exactly like someone's forever. She started walking. She was 3 rows from the front when she looked at Alden's face and stopped. "Alden," her voice carried softly. The organ trailed away. "I can't marry you," he said, not unkindly, not loudly, just clearly with nothing in it that needed to be softened. "I'm sorry, Lacey, I can't." The church went very quiet. Her face moved through several things in the space of 2 seconds. Confusion, then fear, then something that sat underneath both of those, something harder and more calculating. "What are you? Everyone is here. Alden, what?" "Lacey Ann Brandt." He said the name she hadn't used in 2 years, and the color left her face. "I know about Wade. I know about Pippa. I know about Dex, and I know what you needed from our family." A pause. All of it. Someone in the pews made a sound. A chair scraped somewhere behind me. Lacey stood completely still, the tulips trembling in her hands. When she finally spoke, the smoothness was entirely gone. "You don't understand what he threatened," she said. Her voice was raw and exhausted, and nothing like the voice I'd known for 8 months. This was real. What he said he would do. "I know," Alden said, and he meant it. I could hear that he meant it. That's a terrible position to be in. But you can't protect one child by building a life on top of someone else's. The church doors opened at the back. Wade walked in, still in the clothes from the café, holding Pippa's hand. Pippa looked around at the flowers, the colored light coming through the windows, the rows of formally dressed people all staring at her, and said in a carrying, delighted voice, "Mummy, it's so pretty in here." The sound that came out of Lacey then was very small and very real. She knelt down right there in the aisle, in her ivory dress, and she opened her arms, and Pippa came running. 2 RCMP officers were waiting at the side entrance. Rosa had arranged it before we'd arrived. I'd spoken to one of them briefly in the parking lot, and I'd also made one other call in those same 4 minutes. To a family support worker I knew through the hospital auxiliary, asking her to be present and standing by. I hadn't told Alden that part. I'd just done it, the way Stanley always said, take care of the next thing. Pippa stayed with Wade. The support worker stood nearby, quiet and unobtrusive. Alden's best man went and stood beside Wade without being asked, and I was grateful for that in a way I didn't have words for. Lacey was escorted out through the side door. She looked back once. Alden looked directly back at her, and he said nothing at all. Sometimes nothing is the clearest possible answer. He came and sat beside me in the front pew, and we let the church empty around us. Quietly, people speaking in low voices, filing out the way people do when something significant has happened, and they're still processing the shape of it. She found me at a grief support fundraiser, Alden said, after a long time. That's how specific this was. Yes. She asked me about Dad within the first 10 minutes. She remembered everything I told her. He paused. I thought that meant she cared. She may have in some way. People are rarely entirely one thing. I chose the next words carefully. But it's also possible that remembering details about someone is just very good research. He nodded slowly. Did I make it easy, he asked, not self-pitying, just honest. You were trusting and kind and still healing. I looked at him. Those aren't things to be ashamed of. Those are things to guard more carefully next time. He was quiet for a while. Pippa, he said, what happens to her? Wade has family in Sudbury. He's going to take her there. I paused. I told him I'd arrange legal counsel to help establish proper custody if he needed it. Alden looked at me. When did you do that? In the parking lot. He shook his head, and something that had been rigid in him all day slowly released. Dad would have done exactly that, he said. Handled the next practical thing while everyone else was still in shock. He taught me well. Alden reached over and took my hand, and we sat in the colored afternoon light while the church settled into its own quiet, and I thought about what it costs to tell the truth to someone you love. Not in virtue, but in the body, that physical toll of it, and decided it was always worth it. Always and entirely. 3 months passed the way good seasons do when you let them, slowly, imperfectly, and forward. Alden started seeing a counselor on Princess Street, and went back to running and came for Sunday dinners. And we talked about his father more than we ever had, which turned out to be exactly what both of us still needed. Clark's Hardware had its best quarter in a decade. Alden threw himself into the business with a focus that looked, from the outside, like ambition, but that I recognized as something else, the specific clarity that comes from having survived something and decided not to waste what you've been given. Lacey pled guilty to fraud and misrepresentation. She received a conditional sentence, 12 months, community service, restitution, no prison time. Some people found this inadequate. I found it sufficient. She would carry what she'd done the way people carry things that don't have a clean resolution. And that is its own weight. Wade and Pippa settled in Sudbury. In November, I received a card. On the inside, Pippa had drawn a picture of something that was either a house or a horse. It was genuinely hard to determine, and Wade had written underneath it, "Thank you for making sure she didn't lose everything." I put it on the refrigerator. Dex was arrested in September on unrelated charges that led, as these things sometimes do, to a larger picture. I didn't follow the details. I just felt the particular relief of a door closing on something dangerous. Rosa joined us for Sunday dinner and then kept joining us, and eventually it stopped being something she was invited to and became something she simply did, which is how the best arrangements come about. One evening in December, the three of us were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, with tea getting cold and the snow starting outside, the kind of ordinary evening that asks nothing of you, and Alden said, "I think what I fell for wasn't her. It was how she made me feel, like I was already enough, even while I was still grieving. Like I didn't have to finish becoming whoever I was going to be. I could just be what I was." I thought about that. "That's not a small thing to want," I said. "No." He turned his mug in his hands. "I'll know to look more carefully for it next time. Not give it to the first person who offers it." "That's exactly right." He looked at me from across the table, the kitchen light warm between us. "You were braver than me today," he said. "Walking into that church knowing what you knew, knowing you might lose me over it." I shook my head. I was terrified. I just decided that losing you to the truth was survivable. Losing you to a lie was not. He smiled at that. The real one. The one that reaches the corners. The one that has always been so much like his father's. "He was right about a lot of things," Alden said. "Most of them I only understood after he was gone," I said. "Which is the way of it, I think. The people who teach us best we don't fully hear until we need them most." Outside, the snow came down over Kingston, soft and unhurried, covering everything evenly. I thought about the morning of the wedding, standing in my dress with one earring in, feeling the wrongness I couldn't name, and choosing not to name it. I wouldn't make that choice again. Whatever came next, I would trust what I knew. I would trust the people who had kept faith with my family for 18 years and more. I would trust the uncomfortable weight in my chest that arrived when something was wrong, and I would not talk myself out of it to spare anyone, including myself. A difficult day. "One painful truth," Stanley used to say, "is worth 10 comfortable silences." He was right. He was right, and I had taken too long to believe him, and now I did. And that, I think, is how it is with the people we love most. We learn them slowly. We learn them, if we're lucky, just in time.